Welcome to my channel. I hope today's story will be something you truly enjoy. Please support me even more. Now, let's begin the story.
I'm Nora Bennett, 33, and I run a compliance software company that went from a spare bedroom idea to a real office with real payroll. I've handled data breaches, angry clients, and sleepless launch nights, but nothing prepared me for the day someone from my childhood walked back in and tried to rewrite my life like it was a group project. She hadn't called in years, hadn't shown up for birthdays, holidays, or my biggest milestones. Yet she sat across from me with this calm, practiced confidence and talked like she still had a claim on everything I'd built. She didn't start with hello. She started with a number. Half. Half of my company, half of my future, half of the thing I protected with my entire 20s. And the reason she gave was almost worse than the demand itself. Family. Like that single word could erase silence, excuses, and all the times I learned to succeed without anyone clapping for me. When I didn't immediately fold, my mother took her side, the way she always did, and told me my sister was smarter than me, and I should be grateful she was even willing to help. I remember feeling my jaw tighten, not from fear, but from clarity. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled and said I needed time to think. Then I went home and did what I've always done when something feels off. I ran the numbers. I checked names. I pulled records. I looked for patterns the way I look for bugs in code. And the more I dug, the more I realized this wasn't a reunion. It was a plan. 1 week later, I invited them into my company's boardroom for what they thought would be their victory lap. I had counsel waiting, I had folders on the table, and I had one question that was about to change the way my family spoke to me forever. If you've ever been told to sacrifice your peace because someone shares your blood, you're going to want to hear what happened next. Before we get into it, hit follow so you don't miss stories like this. Because the truth is, the people who demand the most from you are often the ones who gave you the least. Growing up, I used to think every family had an unspoken ranking system, like maybe all kids felt it and I was just being sensitive. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Chicago where everything looked normal from the street. Trimmed lawns, school fundraisers, neighbors waving as they pulled into their driveways. Inside our house, though, the rules were simple. My sister was the story everyone wanted to tell, and I was the footnote. She was the kind of kid adults instantly liked. Big smile, quick jokes, always performing without even trying. She joined everything that came with a spotlight. Pageants at the community center, cheerleading, student council, anything that let her walk into a room and collect attention like tips in a jar. My mom loved that about her. She didn't just support it, she fed it. Like my sister's popularity was proof that she had done motherhood correctly. If my sister needed a new dress for an event, it appeared. If she wanted her hair done, my mom made an appointment. If she had a new dream, my mom announced it like it was already a success. Meanwhile, I was the kid who stayed up late teaching myself how computers worked on an old, wheezing desktop someone had given us. I loved the logic of it, the calm feeling of making something make sense. I'd borrow books from the library, copy code by hand, and get this tiny rush every time a program finally ran. My mom didn't hate that I was quiet, but she treated it like a phase she couldn't monetize into pride. When I asked for a new programming book, she told me to be practical. So I got a part-time job at a coffee shop as soon as I was old enough, and I bought my own books, my own laptop upgrades, my own little future one shift at a time. My dad tried to be the steady one. He worked at a bank, came home tired, and when I brought him report cards or told him I'd won an academic award, he'd smile and say I was smart and I'd be fine. He meant it as comfort, but what it taught me was this: I couldn't count on anyone to advocate for me. Even when relatives made comments at holidays about how obvious the favoritism was, my mom would brush it off and say my sister needed more support because she was gifted with people. The message stayed consistent for years. My sister was the star who deserved investment. I was the quiet one who could take care of myself. By the time we were applying to colleges, the pattern was so normal it almost didn't hurt anymore. Until I got into Stanford on a full academic scholarship, and my mother's first reaction wasn't pride. It was worry that my success would make my sister look smaller. She told me gently, like she was giving advice, that maybe I should choose somewhere closer to home, somewhere less intense, somewhere that wouldn't create distance between the family. I remember nodding, pretending to consider it, while something inside me hardened into a promise. If my own family was scared of my potential, then I was going to build a life so solid their opinions couldn't shake it. Stanford was the first place I ever felt invisible in a way that was peaceful. Nobody there knew my sister. Nobody cared who my mother favored. I could walk across campus and just be another student with a backpack, a laptop, and a head full of problems I actually wanted to solve. I poured myself into computer science and data systems, the kind of work where effort shows up in results, and nobody can talk their way around the numbers. I made friends who respected consistency, not charisma. I found professors who didn't need me to be loud to recognize that I was good. When I graduated, I stayed in Northern California and took a job in tech that paid more money than anyone in my family had ever made at my age. I thought, for a second, that success would finally change how things felt at home. I thought maybe they'd see me differently once I had something undeniable. But every time I flew back for a holiday or a birthday, the conversation still tilted toward my sister like gravity. My mom asked about her social life, her network, the way she could walk into any room and win people over. My sister bounced between marketing jobs and big plans, always one new opportunity away from becoming the person my mom swore she already was. If I mentioned a promotion, my mom would smile and say, "That's nice, honey," and then immediately ask if I'd seen my sister's new photos. If I talked about a project I led, my sister would interrupt with a story about how she almost landed a huge client, but the company just didn't appreciate her. I learned to keep my wins small when I came home, not because I was ashamed, but because sharing them felt like feeding a machine that never produced warmth. Around 27, I met Ethan. He was a data analyst with a calm, observant way of speaking, the kind of person who listened first and talked second. We built a life that felt simple and real, and when he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. Not because it was a fairy tale, but because for the first time, I felt chosen for who I was, not what I could provide. That was also the year I started thinking seriously about building something of my own. I'd spent long enough watching executives make decisions that didn't match reality. I had an idea for a compliance platform that could help hospitals and insurers manage data governance without drowning in manual checks. It wasn't flashy, but it was useful. It solved a real problem. When I mentioned the idea at a family dinner, my mom's eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen for me in years. For a moment, I thought she was excited for me. Then she said it. "Your sister would be perfect for this. She knows marketing. She knows people. You should bring her in as a partner." My sister leaned back like it was already decided, like she was doing me a favor by agreeing. She said something about how I needed someone with real-world skills and how it would be smart to split things evenly. 50-50, like my work was only half a business until she attached her name to it. I tried to stay polite. I said I appreciated the thought, but I wasn't looking for a partner. I said I'd hire professionals when the time was right. My sister's smile turned sharp. My mom's voice got colder. She told me I was being stubborn and selfish, that family should build together, that I shouldn't act like I was better than everyone. My sister called me ungrateful. And then, like she always did when she couldn't win with charm, she went for guilt. She said I didn't care about the family. She said Ethan was turning me into someone who thought she was too good for her own blood. The room got loud. My dad stared at his plate. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, but I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. That night, after we left, my phone lit up with messages from my mother that weren't about understanding. They were about obedience. I stared at the screen and realized something I didn't want to admit. They didn't want me to succeed. They wanted access to my success. So I did what I'd never done before. I stepped back. I stopped calling. I stopped trying to earn approval that was designed to stay out of reach. And when Ethan and I moved to Denver for my next role, I didn't tell them until the boxes were already unpacked. Denver gave me distance, and distance gave me momentum. I took what I'd learned in tech, the mistakes I watched other people make, the gaps I kept seeing in compliance and data governance, and I built my own solution the way I always had, quietly, carefully, and with a plan. Clear Ledger compliance started small, just me, Ethan, and a couple contractors who believed in the product. I didn't launch with a flashy party or a press release. I launched with contracts. One client became 3. 3 became 10. I hired engineers, then support, then sales, then compliance specialists who could translate regulations into product requirements without guessing. Within a few years, we weren't surviving, we were scaling. Real office, real benefits, real payroll deposits hitting real people's bank accounts on Fridays. The number that used to feel impossible started showing up on statements like it belonged there. Millions in revenue, steady growth, and a reputation that mattered in a niche most people didn't even understand. I didn't post it online. I didn't brag. I just kept building. That was the life I wanted. A life no one could take credit for, and no one could threaten. For a while, my family stayed in the background, exactly where I needed them. We'd exchange polite holiday texts. My mother would send the occasional guilt-laced message about how I was drifting away, and I'd respond with something neutral. My sisters stayed mostly silent, which should have been a relief, but it always felt like the quiet before weather. Then my dad got sick. Lung cancer. The kind that doesn't care about your plans or your timing. By the time I flew back to Illinois, the house felt smaller, like grief was already taking up space in every room. My dad tried to be strong for us. He made jokes. He told me he was proud, not in a dramatic speech, but in that soft, tired way that made it feel real. My sister showed up late to appointments and loud to conversations, acting like she was holding the family together while everyone else fell apart. My mother clung to her, almost desperately, like my sister's confidence could keep death out of the room. When my dad passed, the funeral was exactly what you'd expect from a family that cared more about appearances than honesty. People hugged, people cried. My mother played the grieving widow. My sister accepted sympathy like it was a role she'd rehearsed. I stood beside the casket and felt this hollow stillness I can't fully describe. After the service, while everyone gathered in the church hall, my sister cornered me near the coffee station and said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, that I was lucky. Lucky that my life was easy now. Lucky that I had a company to distract me. Lucky that I could just fly in and fly out like grief was something you could schedule. I didn't respond. I just looked at her and realized she was already measuring what my father's death could do for her. After I returned to Denver, I told myself that chapter was closed. I focused on work. I focused on keeping my employees safe and my clients happy. Months passed. Then one evening, my phone rang and it was my mother. Her voice was strangely gentle, the kind of gentle that always meant she wanted something. She said she'd found something of my dad's, a message, a letter. She said he'd written about how he wished his daughters would stop being distant and build something together, like a legacy. She didn't say it like a memory. She said it like a lever. Before I could even ask questions, she added that my sister had been thinking a lot about the family, about the future, about how we could be stronger if we worked as one. I should have ended the call right there. I should have told her no and hung up. But grief makes you vulnerable in ways you don't see coming. I missed my dad. I wanted to believe there was a version of my family that could be better. So when my mother suggested we meet in Denver to talk, I said yes. 2 days later, I got a text from a number I didn't have saved. It was my sister. Just one line at first, like we were old friends. Miss you. We should finally do this right. And then, right after that, the real message arrived. She wanted half. 50% of Clear Ledger. Because we're family. I didn't answer my sister's message right away. I read it twice. Then I set my phone down like it was something hot. The next morning, I went to the office early. Not because I felt emotional, but because I felt alert. There's a difference. In my world, when something looks too simple, it's usually because someone is hiding the complicated part. 50% wasn't a request. It was a takeover dressed up as reconciliation. I knew if I reacted like a daughter, I'd lose like a daughter. So I forced myself to react like a founder. I replied with one sentence that sounded cooperative and harmless. I said I needed a week to think, and I wanted to review everything properly. She responded almost instantly, like she'd been waiting with her finger hovering over the screen. And that alone told me this wasn't about healing the relationship. It was about timing. That same day, I called my corporate counsel, Priya Shah, and I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her someone from my family was demanding half the company and using my mother to apply pressure. Priya didn't laugh, didn't gasp, didn't judge. She just asked the kind of questions that made my chest loosen because they were practical. Who has access to your cap table? Who knows your client list? Who can contact your employees? Have you shared any internal documents? Have you promised anything in writing? Have you let them think they have authority? Then she said something that shifted the whole situation into focus. People don't come asking for half unless they believe they can force you to hand it over quietly. We started by locking down what mattered. Priya reviewed our shareholder structure, our bylaws, our IP assignments, and every place a manipulator might try to claim entitlement. She told me not to negotiate over text and not to say anything that could sound like an offer. No casual lines like "I'll bring you in" or "we can split things" or "let's partner." One sloppy message could become the seed of a lawsuit designed to drain me into settling. That was the part most people don't understand. You don't need a strong case to make someone miserable. You just need a loud enough threat. While Priya tightened the legal side, I focused on the human side. My sister had suddenly started talking like an executive, and I knew that voice wasn't coming from her. 2 days later, she showed up in Denver, not alone. I didn't use names in my head yet. I just noticed the details. The new boyfriend in the background of her photos, the perfectly timed check-ins, the way she suddenly used phrases like valuation and equity and leverage like she'd been rehearsing. I told her we could meet for coffee, but only in public. Only for 30 minutes. And I didn't bring Ethan because I didn't want them testing him. She arrived dressed like she was pitching investors, and the guy with her shook my hand too firmly, smiled too smoothly, and spoke too much for someone who wasn't invited. He called himself Caleb, said he helped companies scale, and then he started complimenting my sister in a way that felt performative, like he was building a stage for her to stand on. He said she had the vision and I had the technical talent, and together we could be unstoppable. Then, without even blinking, my sister repeated the demand. 50%, because we're family. I kept my face neutral and said I'd review her proposal with my team. Caleb leaned in and said something quiet that made my stomach drop. He said it would be a shame if this turned into something public, like he was already imagining contacting my clients, my employees, my board. I smiled, said thank you for coming, and left. That night, I hired a private investigator, Marcus Reed, the kind of professional Priya actually respected. Marcus didn't promise drama, he promised receipts. Within 48 hours, he sent me a summary that made everything click. Caleb Mercer wasn't his real name. The real name was Grant Holloway, and there was a trail behind him. Failed startups, angry partners, small claims judgments, a pattern of consulting gigs that ended with money missing and accusations flying. Marcus also found something worse. Grant had been involved in a prior dispute where he pressured a founder by threatening to contact clients and expose private information unless he got paid to go away. It wasn't a criminal record, but it was a pattern. And patterns are more valuable than accusations. Then came the moment that felt almost too perfect, like karma was helping me. But I knew better. My sister forwarded me a document she thought was harmless, a so-called partnership outline, and she didn't realize the file included revision notes and a comment thread. In the margins, Grant had written the strategy in plain language: pressure the family angle, push for 50. If she refuses, threaten reputation, mention clients, force settlement. My hands didn't shake. I just felt cold and calm. Priya told me to save everything, export it properly, and stop speaking to them except through controlled channels. I did exactly that. I didn't confront them right away. I waited. Because the most satisfying revenge isn't loud at the beginning. It's quiet until the moment you choose to end it. A week later, I emailed my sister and invited her to Clear Ledger for a decision meeting. I kept the tone warm, professional, almost cooperative, because I wanted her to walk in confident. Priya, my corporate counsel, was already in the boardroom when they arrived. My sister came dressed like an executive. Her boyfriend followed right behind her, still calling himself Caleb, still smiling like he owned the air in the room. They sat down and immediately started talking about 50%, like it was a starting point, not a theft. I let them speak. Then I began asking calm, simple questions, the kind that sound harmless until you realize they have nowhere to hide. What role are you taking? What exactly are you accountable for? Which clients are you bringing? What experience do you have running audits, procurement, compliance reviews? My sister floated through vague answers. Caleb tried to rescue her with buzzwords and pressure, hinting that this could get messy if I didn't play along. Then I looked at him and said, "For the paperwork, what's your full legal name?" He didn't blink. "Caleb Mercer?" I nodded, then slid a single page across the table. "Grant Holloway." His face changed so fast my sister turned to him like she'd never seen him before. I didn't raise my voice. I slid the next page. The partnership outline my sister forwarded me, with the comment thread still attached. Pressure the family angle. Push for 50. If she refuses, threaten reputation. Mention clients. Force settlement. My sister's confidence collapsed into confusion. Grant tried to talk his way out, said it was taken out of context, then made the mistake of repeating the threat right in front of counsel. Priya didn't even react. She just placed a document in front of them. Agreement and release. No equity claim, no contact, no disparagement. A signed admission they had zero authority over my company. I told them they could sign and leave quietly, or refuse, and deal with a legal fight backed by every receipt they'd handed me. My sister stared at the papers, then at Grant, and for the first time she couldn't charm her way to a win. She signed. Grant signed. Then I slid my phone across the table and said, "Call Mom on speaker and tell her the truth." When my mother answered, my sister's voice shook as she admitted she was broke, that the family legacy story was a setup, and that she came for my company because Grant promised it would be easy. On the speaker, my mother went silent. And in that silence, I could hear something I'd waited my whole life for. reality finally catching up to the story she'd been telling herself. The moment the call ended, the room felt different, like someone had finally opened a window after years of stale air. My sister stayed seated, staring at the paperwork with her hands flat on the table, as if touching it could undo what she'd done. Grant was the first one to move. He pushed his chair back too fast, tried to laugh it off, tried to act offended, like he was the real victim of some misunderstanding. But his voice kept catching, because he knew the truth. He'd walked into my company believing he could bully me into a settlement, and he'd walked out with his real name on record and a signed agreement that shut every door he was planning to use. Priya stood and calmly reminded him that the agreement and release wasn't a suggestion. It was enforceable. No contacting my clients, no contacting my employees, no mentioning my company online, no telling his side to anyone who could cause reputational harm. One violation and we would seek an injunction and damages. Grant's face went tight, and he stopped arguing. He left without saying goodbye, without looking at me, without that smug smile he'd been wearing all week. My sister didn't follow right away. She sat there quietly, and for the first time I could see her without the spotlight my mother always put on her. She looked small, not because I'd defeated her, but because she had run out of stories to hide behind. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw a speech in her face. I just said, evenly, "You're not getting a piece of my life because you share my last name." Then I stood up and ended the meeting the way I'd end any other meeting that had gone off track. "We're done here." My sister finally stood, eyes glossy, and walked out like she didn't know where she belonged anymore. That afternoon, my mother called me back. Not to yell, not to lecture. Her voice was shaky, confused, and for once, honest. She asked me if what my sister said was true, if this had really been a setup. I said yes. I told her I had evidence, and I told her I wasn't going to argue about it, because for once the truth didn't need my permission to exist. My mother went quiet, and then she asked the question I'd heard my whole life, except this time, it sounded different. She asked, "Why would she do this?" I answered, "Because you taught her that my boundaries are negotiable." There was silence again, but it wasn't the old silence where my dad stared at his plate. It was the silence of someone realizing they can't blame the wrong person anymore. My mother didn't apologize immediately. She defended herself a little, said she only wanted the family close, said she didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't let her drift into excuses. I told her closeness without respect isn't closeness, it's control. I told her if she wanted to be in my life, it would be on new terms. No guilt, no pressure, no pushing my sister into my space. If she crossed that line, I'd step back again, and this time it would be permanent. She agreed, not enthusiastically, but quietly, like she finally understood I meant it. Over the next few days, the fallout happened in layers. Grant tried to salvage the situation first. He sent my sister frantic messages, then tried calling from a different number, then tried to paint me as paranoid and cruel, the classic move when a manipulator loses. But Priya had warned me about that too. We didn't respond. We saved everything. And because we now had his real identity, Marcus pulled another round of public records that made the consequences unavoidable. One of Grant's old disputes had never fully died. He'd been skirting accountability by changing names and jumping from state to state. This time, he'd stepped into a room where people knew how to document and escalate. Within 2 weeks, Marcus told me a former partner had reopened a civil case after learning Grant was operating again. A demand letter followed, then another. Grant didn't get a cinematic punishment. He got something more realistic, and honestly, more satisfying. He got exposure. He got watched. He got labeled. The kind of person who survives on fresh starts can't survive when the past keeps introducing itself first. My sister, meanwhile, had to go back home because she didn't have the money she'd pretended to have. She moved into my mother's house, and that alone was a consequence she didn't know how to handle. It's one thing to be the golden child when you're winning. It's another when you're living in the same childhood bedroom you used to brag about escaping. At first, my mother tried to revert to the old script, tried to soothe her, tried to blame stress, grief, bad influences. But my sister had already admitted the plan out loud. She couldn't unsay it. And my mother couldn't unhear it. For once, the favoritism had nowhere to hide. My sister's phone calls to me started the way you'd expect. She didn't begin with, "I'm sorry." She began with soft bargaining. She said she was under pressure. She said she didn't mean it like that. She said she wasn't thinking. I listened, and then I told her something she wasn't used to hearing from me. Intent doesn't erase impact. You didn't just disrespect me. You tried to take my livelihood. You tried to involve Mom. You tried to weaponize Dad's memory. And because of that, things are different now. I told her I wasn't going to punish her forever, but I also wasn't going to reward her with closeness she hadn't earned. If she wanted a relationship, it would be slow, it would be consistent, and it would start with accountability. Not tears, not excuses. Accountability. The biggest change came a month later during a Sunday call with my mother. She sounded older than I remembered, like guilt can physically weigh on a person. She didn't ask about my sister's dreams. She asked about my work, my health, my life, and then she said, "I keep thinking about all the times I made you feel like you were alone." I didn't jump to comfort her. I let her sit with it. Because growth sometimes requires discomfort. She told me she'd been proud of my sister's attention and popularity because it felt like validation, and she'd assumed I didn't need the same kind of care because I was capable. Then she said, quietly, that she realized she had been wrong. She said she was sorry, not just for that week in Denver, but for years. That apology didn't fix everything overnight, but it did something important. It changed the direction of the story. It was the first time she acknowledged that being capable doesn't mean you deserve less love. As for me, I chose an ending that felt true to who I am. I didn't let this make me reckless or bitter. I tightened my security, locked down internal access, updated company policies about unsolicited visitors, and trained my team to route any family inquiries straight to legal. I protected what I built. And I also did one small thing that surprised even Ethan when I told him. I sent my sister a short email with a list of entry-level openings near our hometown, basic roles at small agencies and local businesses. No introductions, no special treatment, just opportunities. I wrote one line above the list. If you want a different life, start building one. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her message was short and plain, with none of the old arrogance. She said, "I understand. I'm sorry. I don't know if she'll change for real. That part isn't something I can control, and it isn't my job to manage anymore. What I can control is the boundary, the standard, and the lesson. Here it is. Family is not a business contract. Blood is not a blank check. Love that demands your sacrifice isn't love, it's entitlement. If someone truly wants to be in your life, they will respect the life you built, not try to claim it. And if you've ever had someone call you selfish for protecting your peace, remember this. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. So tell me, if you were in my position, would you keep the door completely closed after a betrayal like that? Or would you allow one narrow path back, with strict boundaries and real accountability? I want to know what you would do. Our team at Revenge Argon works hard to create compelling, meaningful scripts that entertain while sharing positive lessons. This story is purely fictional, made to deliver educational takeaways and thoughtful messages for our viewers. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please follow the channel. Your support truly motivates us to create even higher quality, more exciting videos for you.